What happens when two of the entertainment industry's most outspoken personalities sit down for what's supposed to be a lighthearted interview, but instead ignites into one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history? Tonight, we're breaking down the explosive conversation between Mariah Carey and Andy Cohen that ended with the legendary diva storming off set, leaving the host speechless and the audience in complete shock. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on in this whole situation. Because trust me, you're going to have opinions. So let's set the scene. Mariah Carey walks onto the set looking absolutely stunning, draped in a form-fitting champagne-colored gown that catches every studio light perfectly. The audience erupts into applause as she glides to the guest chair, her signature smile fixed in place. Andy Cohen stands to greet her, arms outstretched for what appears to be a warm hug. But there's already something in Mariah's body language that suggests this might not go as smoothly as planned. She accepts the embrace, but it's brief, almost perfunctory. And as she settles into her seat, there's a noticeable tension in how she adjusts her dress and crosses her legs. Andy starts off friendly enough, complimenting her appearance and thanking her for coming on the show. Mariah responds with a gracious nod, her voice that familiar blend of breathy and melodic as she says thank you. It's wonderful to be here. But anyone who knows Mariah Carey knows that tone, that particular inflection that suggests she's being polite rather than genuine. Andy either doesn't pick up on it or chooses to ignore it, launching into his first question about her recent residency in Las Vegas and how it felt to be back performing live after such a tumultuous few years in the industry. Mariah's answer is measured, almost rehearsed, talking about how grateful she is to her fans, how performing gives her life all the expected responses. Andy nods along, but then he does what Andy Cohen does best. He pivots. He brings up a tweet that Mariah posted 3 months ago, something cryptic about loyalty and respect in the music industry, and asks her directly if that was aimed at anyone in particular. The smile on Mariah's face doesn't quite reach her eyes anymore as she replies, "I think we all know that social media can be interpreted in many different ways, and I prefer to let my music speak for itself." It's a deflection, a clear attempt to move past the topic, but Andy presses forward. He mentions rumors that have been circulating about tension between Mariah and several other artists, specifically bringing up a recent award show where Mariah allegedly refused to present alongside another major pop star. The audience goes quiet, sensing the shift in energy. Mariah uncrosses and recrosses her legs, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of her chair. She takes a visible breath before responding, and when she does, her voice has lost some of that breathy quality and gained an edge. "I think it's interesting," she begins, "how in this industry, a woman who has standards, who knows her worth and refuses to compromise, is immediately labeled as difficult. But when men do the exact same thing, they're called perfectionists or visionaries." Andy tries to interject, to clarify that he wasn't calling her difficult. But Mariah holds up one perfectly manicured hand, a gesture that's both elegant and commanding, and continues speaking. "I came on this show tonight because I was told this would be a conversation about my music, my artistry, my legacy. Instead, it seems like we're here to discuss gossip and rumors that have no basis in reality." Andy leans back in his chair, clearly recalculating his approach. He attempts to lighten the mood with a laugh, saying that his show has always been about honest conversations and getting to know the real person behind the celebrity persona. Mariah's response is immediate and cutting. "The real person behind the celebrity persona," she repeats, as if testing the words in her mouth. "Andy, I've been in this industry for over 3 decades. I've sold more records than most artists will ever dream of. I've broken barriers, set records, and created a legacy that will outlive both of us. The real person is someone who has earned the right to not entertain tabloid nonsense on national television." The tension in the studio is palpable now. You can see audience members exchanging glances, some looking uncomfortable, others leaning forward in anticipation of what might happen next. Andy tries to recover, suggesting they move on to talk about her upcoming album, but there's a defensiveness in his voice now. He mentions that he's had hundreds of guests on his show, many of them major stars, and they've all been willing to engage in candid conversations about various topics. Mariah's laugh in response is brief and humorless. "Candid conversations," she says, or opportunities to create viral moments at the expense of your guest's dignity. There's a difference between being a good interviewer and being someone who trades in sensationalism. Andy's face flushes slightly, and you can see his jaw tighten. He responds that his show has always been respectful, that he asks the questions his audience wants answered, and that if celebrities aren't prepared to be honest and open, perhaps they shouldn't agree to do interviews at all. That comment hangs in the air for a moment, and Mariah goes very still. Her expression doesn't change dramatically, but something shifts in her eyes, a kind of crystallization of resolve. She speaks quietly now, which somehow makes her words even more impactful. So what you're saying is that I should either participate in what amounts to a gossip session disguised as journalism, or I shouldn't be here at all. Is that correct? Andy tries to backtrack, saying that's not what he meant, that he respects her immensely and just wants to have an engaging conversation. But Mariah isn't having it. She points out specific questions he's asked, noting how each one was designed to get her to comment on feuds, controversies, or personal drama rather than focusing on her actual work. She asks him directly when he was planning to discuss the new album, the songwriting process, the producers she's working with, any of the things that actually matter to her as an artist. Andy attempts to redirect, saying they still have plenty of time to discuss all of those things. But he believes his audience is also interested in the human side of celebrities, in their relationships and experiences beyond just their professional accomplishments. Mariah's response is swift and sharp. Then perhaps you should have been honest about that when your producers reached out to my team. We were told this would be a substantive conversation about my career and my music. If I wanted to sit down for a gossip session, there are plenty of other shows I could have chosen. The host tries another approach, suggesting that Mariah is being overly sensitive, that these are standard interview questions that every celebrity faces. This is clearly the wrong thing to say. Mariah's posture straightens even more, if that's possible, and her voice takes on a tone that anyone familiar with her interviews over the years would recognize as dangerous territory. Overly sensitive, she repeats slowly. That's an interesting choice of words. Tell me, Andy, when you have male artists on this show, do you spend the majority of the interview asking them about their personal conflicts and relationships? Or do you actually discuss their music? Andy stammers slightly, insisting that he treats all his guests the same way, but Mariah is ready with examples. She cites specific interviews he's done with male artists, pointing out how the conversations centered on their creative processes, their influences, their artistic visions. Then she contrasts those with interviews he's done with female artists, noting the pattern of questions about feuds, romantic relationships, and personal drama. The audience is completely silent now, riveted by this deconstruction. Happening in real time, Andy's defense is that those are the topics that generate the most interest, that his show is entertainment and people want to be entertained. Mariah nods slowly, as if she's finally gotten him to admit what she suspected all along. So you're acknowledging that you deliberately steer conversations with women toward gossip and controversy because it's more entertaining. That's what you're saying? Andy tries to clarify, to nuance his position, but he's clearly flustered now, aware that this conversation has gotten away from him completely. He suggests they start over, that they can reset and have the kind of conversation Mariah wants to have. But Mariah is already gathering her small clutch purse from beside her chair. She stands, smoothing down her gown with a practiced motion, and looks directly at Andy with an expression that manages to be both disappointed and resolute. I think we've already had exactly the conversation you intended to have, she says calmly. The only difference is that I'm not playing along the way you expected me to. Andy stands as well, his voice taking on a pleading quality as he asks her not to leave, reminding her that they still have half the segment left, that walking off will only create more controversy. Mariah's smile returns, but it's not warm. Sometimes, she says, the most powerful statement you can make is refusing to participate in your own diminishment. She turns to the audience, gives a small wave, and says, "Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm sorry we didn't get to have the conversation you deserved to hear." As she begins to walk toward the stage exit, Andy calls after her, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. As she begins to walk toward the stage exit, Andy calls after her, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. He says, "Mariah, come on, this is ridiculous. We're in the middle of taping a show." She pauses, but doesn't turn around completely, just glances back over her shoulder with an expression that could freeze water. Ridiculous, she says, is thinking that I would sit here and let you turn my appearance into a circus for ratings. She takes another step, and that's when Andy makes a critical mistake. He says something about how this kind of behavior is exactly why people find her difficult to work with, why there are so many stories about her being a diva. Mariah stops walking entirely now. The silence that follows is deafening, stretching out for what feels like an eternity but is probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Then she turns around fully, her gown sweeping elegantly as she pivots on her heel and walks back toward the interview area. For a moment, it seems like she might be reconsidering, like maybe she's going to sit back down and they'll salvage the interview. But instead, she stands at the edge of the stage, commanding the space in a way that makes it clear she's not returning as a guest, but as someone who has something to say. Let's talk about that word. She begins, her voice steady and clear. Diva. It's fascinating how that term gets weaponized against women in this industry. When a man has high standards, when he demands excellence from the people around him, when he refuses to accept anything less than perfection, he's a genius. He's dedicated. He's passionate about his craft. But when a woman does the exact same thing, she's a diva. She's difficult. She's high maintenance. Andy opens his mouth to respond. But Mariah isn't finished. I have been called a diva for 30 years, she continues. And do you know what that word really means in the context it's used? It means a woman who won't be controlled. A woman who knows her value and refuses to pretend otherwise. A woman who has the audacity to expect the same level of professionalism and respect that male artists receive without question. Andy tries to interject, saying that he uses that term affectionately, that it's a compliment in his view. But Mariah's expression suggests she's heard this defense before and finds it completely unconvincing. You don't get to decide whether it's a compliment or an insult, she tells him firmly. Words have power, Andy, and the way you use them reveals more about your intentions than any explanation you could offer. When you introduce someone as a diva before they've even sat down, when you frame the entire conversation around that concept, you're setting a narrative. You're telling your audience how to perceive that person before they've said a single word. Andy argues that it's just showbiz, just entertainment, that everyone understands it's not meant to be taken seriously. But that's exactly the problem. Mariah responds, her voice rising slightly with passion. It is taken seriously. Young women watching this show, young artists trying to make it in this industry. They see these conversations and they learn that if they advocate for themselves, if they set boundaries, if they demand respect, they'll be labeled as difficult, they'll be mocked, they'll be turned into punchlines. Is that really the message you want to send? Andy's response is defensive now, saying that he's always been supportive of women in the industry, that his show has featured countless female artists and entertainers. Supporting women isn't just about giving them a platform, Mariah counters immediately. It's about how you use that platform. It's about whether you're genuinely interested in their work and their perspectives, or whether you're just using them as content to fill your airtime. Every question you asked me tonight was designed to get me to either confirm gossip or create new headlines. Not once did you ask me about the actual music I'm making. Not once did you express genuine curiosity about my creative process or what drives me as an artist. So tell me, Andy, how exactly is that supportive? The host's face is flushed now, and you can see him struggling to maintain his composure. He points out that Mariah agreed to come on the show, that her publicist confirmed the appearance, that if she had specific topics she wanted to discuss, that should have been communicated in advance. Mariah's laugh is sharp and bitter. Oh, it was communicated, she assures him. My team sent over a list of topics I was willing to discuss. They specifically noted subjects that were off limits, and yet, somehow, every single one of your questions managed to touch on exactly what we said we wouldn't address. So either you're incredibly careless, or you deliberately ignored those boundaries hoping I'd answer anyway. Andy's response is telling. He says that those kinds of restrictions are unrealistic, that his show thrives on spontaneity and honest conversation, and that putting up walls around certain topics defeats the entire purpose of doing an interview. Mariah nods as if this confirms everything she suspected. So, you're admitting that respecting a guest's boundaries is incompatible with your vision for the show. That's very honest of you, and it explains exactly why I'm leaving. Andy protests that she's twisting his words, that he's just trying to have an authentic conversation. But Mariah is relentless now. Authentic conversation requires mutual respect, she says firmly. It requires both parties to feel safe and valued. What you're describing isn't authenticity, it's entrapment. You invite someone onto your show. You create an environment where they're expected to be gracious and accommodating, because that's what celebrities are supposed to be. And then you use that social contract against them by asking invasive questions. They can't comfortably refuse to answer without seeming defensive or difficult. It's a no-win situation, and I'm not interested in playing that game. Andy's frustration is becoming more visible now. He tells Mariah that she's being unfair, that she's making him out to be some kind of villain when he's just doing his job as an interviewer. He points out that other celebrities have had no problem with his interview style. That maybe the issue isn't with him, but with her inability to handle basic questions about her life and career. The audience audibly gasps at this, recognizing that he's crossed a line. Mariah's expression doesn't change, but there's a flicker of something in her eyes, disappointment mixed with vindication. As if he's just proven her point better than she ever could, she repeats slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Andy, I have done thousands of interviews over the course of my career. I've sat across from journalists, talk show hosts, radio personalities, podcasters, every kind of media you can imagine. I've answered difficult questions about my personal life, my struggles, my failures, my successes. I've been incredibly open when treated with respect and genuine curiosity. So the problem isn't that I can't handle questions. The problem is that I refuse to tolerate disrespect. Masquerading as journalism. Andy throws his hands up in a gesture of exasperation, asking what exactly he said that's so disrespectful, challenging her to point to a specific moment where he crossed a line. Mariah is ready for this. She walks back toward the chairs, but she doesn't sit down. Instead, she stands behind the guest chair, her hands resting on its back, and begins to methodically list every question he asked, explaining how each one was problematic. The tweet about loyalty, she notes, was clearly an attempt to get her to comment on a rumored feud that doesn't actually exist. The question about the award show, she points out, was based on completely unverified gossip from an anonymous source. She continues through each question, dissecting the framing, the assumptions, the loaded language. With each example, Andy's defense becomes weaker, his justifications less convincing. He tries to argue that these are normal questions, that any journalist would ask similar things, but Mariah systematically dismantles that argument. She pulls out her phone, and for a moment Andy looks alarmed, probably wondering if she's recording this or about to post something on social media. Instead, she pulls up several interviews from respected journalists and reads excerpts, demonstrating how it's entirely possible to have engaging, entertaining conversations about an artist's life and work without resorting to gossip and speculation. Andy's response is to accuse her of being overprepared, of coming into this interview with an agenda, looking for reasons to be offended. This backfires spectacularly. Mariah's smile is cold as she responds that, yes, she did come prepared, because experience has taught her to expect exactly this kind of treatment. She explains that women in the entertainment industry, particularly women who have been successful for as long as she has, learn to anticipate the ways they'll be undermined, dismissed, and used for content. She says she's been doing this long enough to recognize the patterns, to see the setup coming from a mile away. But here's the thing, she continues, her voice taking on a quality that's almost professorial. I shouldn't have to come prepared for battle every time I agree to do an interview. The fact that I do, the fact that women in this industry have to constantly be on guard, strategizing how to protect themselves from their own colleagues, that's not normal. That's not how it should be. And every time someone like you dismisses these concerns as oversensitivity or suggests that we're being unreasonable for having boundaries, you're contributing to a system that devalues women's voices and experiences. Andy's face shows a complex mix of emotions now. Anger, defensiveness. Andy's response is defensive, almost wounded, as he insists that he's always been a fan of hers, that he's celebrated her music and her legacy. Mariah lets him finish, waiting with impatience that somehow feels more cutting than if she had interrupted. When he finally trails off, she speaks quietly, but with unmistakable clarity. Being a fan of someone's work and respecting them as a person are two different things. Andy, You can enjoy what someone creates while still treating them as a commodity. You can praise their talent while simultaneously reducing them to entertainment fodder. The two are not mutually exclusive, and frankly, one doesn't excuse the other. Andy looks genuinely taken aback by this, as if the distinction had never occurred to him. He starts to say something about how he's built his entire career on connecting with celebrities, on creating a space where they can be themselves, but Mariah cuts him off with a gesture that's both gentle and firm. Can they really be themselves, though? She asks. Or can they only be the version of themselves that serves your narrative? Think about the questions you ask. Think about the moments you choose to highlight. Think about what gets turned into clips and shared across social media. Is that really about letting people be authentic, or is it about creating moments that will generate buzz and boost your ratings? The host's voice rises slightly in frustration as he points out that every talk show operates on the same principles, that creating memorable moments is literally the job description, that if she has a problem with his approach, she essentially has a problem with the entire format of celebrity interviews. Mariah nods slowly, as if she's been waiting for him to arrive at this conclusion. Maybe I do, she admits. Maybe the entire format is broken. Maybe we've normalized something that shouldn't be normal. Just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's the right way or that it should continue unchallenged. And he laughs. But it's a bitter sound without humor. He says, "So what are you suggesting? That we just sit here and discuss your album track by track? That we ignore everything else about you as a person? That we pretend you exist in some vacuum where only your music matters?" Mariah's response is immediate and sharp. Why is it that you can only imagine two extremes? Either I participate in gossip and speculation, or I'm supposedly pretending to exist in a vacuum. What about the middle ground, Andy? What about asking substantive questions about my life and experiences that don't rely on rumors and manufactured controversy? She begins to offer examples, her voice gaining strength as she speaks. You could have asked me about how motherhood has influenced my songwriting. You could have asked about the technical aspects of my vocal approach and how it's evolved over the years. You could have asked about the producers I've chosen to work with on this new album and what drew me to collaborate with them. You could have asked about the themes I'm exploring in my music and why they matter to me at this point in my career. There are 1,000 interesting, engaging questions you could have asked that would have given your audience real insight into who I am as an artist and as a person. Andy's expression suggests he's hearing this but not fully accepting it. He argues that those kinds of questions might be interesting to music journalists and hardcore fans, but that his audience wants something more accessible, more relatable, more human. Mariah's laugh is sharp enough to cut glass. So in your view, asking about my creative process and artistic choices is somehow less human than asking me to comment on gossip? That's a fascinating perspective, and it says a lot about how you view artistry and the people who dedicate their lives to it. Art isn't separate from humanity, Andy. For many of us, it's the most human thing about us. The host shifts in his chair, his discomfort now plainly visible. He tries to pivot, suggesting that maybe they've both made mistakes in how they've approached this conversation, that perhaps they can find a way forward if they're both willing to compromise. But Mariah isn't interested in false equivalence. She points out that she came prepared to have a professional conversation, that she showed up on time, that she was courteous and gracious until it became clear that her boundaries weren't going to be respected. She asks him what exactly she's done wrong other than refusing to play along with an interview. Format she finds problematic. Andy's response reveals his frustration. He says that by walking off, by turning this into a confrontation, she's creating exactly the kind of drama and spectacle she claims to be against. He suggests that she's being hypocritical, that if she really wanted to avoid controversy, she would have simply answered his questions politely and moved on. Mariah's smile is sad and knowing. That's the trap, though, isn't it? If I stay and answer questions I find disrespectful, I'm complicit in my own diminishment. If I leave, I'm difficult and dramatic. Either way, I lose, and you get your viral moment. The difference is that this way, at least I maintain my integrity, the audience has been remarkably quiet throughout this exchange. But now there are murmurs, people whispering to each other, trying to process what they're witnessing. Andy seems to remember suddenly that they're not alone, that this entire conversation is being recorded, that whatever happens next will be dissected and analyzed by millions of people. His voice takes on a more measured tone as he suggests that maybe they should take a break, talk off camera, figure out how to proceed. But Mariah shakes her head firmly. "There's nothing to figure out," she tells him. "I've said what I needed to say, and I think you've revealed exactly who you are as an interviewer and as a person." Andy's face flushes red at this, and his composure finally cracks. He raises his voice, saying that she doesn't get to come onto his show and lecture him about journalism, that she's a singer, not a media critic, and that if she can't handle a simple interview without turning it into a political statement, maybe she shouldn't be doing press at all. The words hang in the air, and you can see the moment he realizes he's gone too far. Mariah's expression doesn't change, but something in her eyes hardens. "There it is," she says softly, "the real Andy Cohen. Not the charming host, not the celebrity friend, but someone who thinks that being a singer somehow disqualifies me from having valid observations about the media that's covered me for 3 decades. She takes a step closer, and despite the fact that she's not physically imposing, there's something about her presence in this moment that makes her seem larger than life. "Let me tell you something about being a singer, Andy. It means I've been interviewed thousands of times. It means I've seen every trick, every manipulation, every attempt to get me to say something I'll regret. It means I've watched the media landscape change and evolve, and I've seen how women in particular are treated by that media. So yes, I am qualified to speak on this. Probably more qualified than you'd like to admit." Andy tries to recover, stammering out something about not meaning to suggest she wasn't intelligent or observant, but the damage is done. Mariah's voice cuts through his attempts at backtracking. "You told me I'm just a singer? As if that's all I am? As if my decades of experience navigating this industry count for nothing? And you wonder why I won't sit here and play along with your games? This is exactly why, because the moment a woman stands up for herself, the moment she refuses to be diminished. Men like you reveal what you really think of us." The host's voice is strained now as he insists that he's not like that he's always been an advocate for women, that his show has featured and celebrated countless female artists. Mariah's response is withering. "Featuring women on your show doesn't make you an advocate, Andy. Treating us with respect does. Asking us substantive questions does. Respecting our boundaries does. You don't get credit for basic human decency. And you certainly don't get to call yourself an ally while simultaneously dismissing our concerns and reducing us to content for your show." Andy looks around as if seeking support from his crew, from the audience, from anyone who might validate his position, but the silence is telling. Even his own staff seems unsure of how to respond to what's unfolding. He makes one last attempt to salvage the situation, suggesting that they're both passionate people who care deeply about their work, that maybe they can channel this energy into a more productive conversation. But Mariah is unmoved. She tells him that passion isn't the issue, that respect is the issue, and that no amount of reframing will change the fundamental problem with how this interview was conducted. The camera captures her exit, the champagne gown catching the lights one final time as she disappears through the stage door. Andy stands there, visibly shaken, unsure of how to proceed. The audience sits in stunned silence, processing what they've just witnessed. After a long moment, Andy turns to the camera and attempts to address the viewers, but his usual confidence is gone. His words are halting, his justifications weak, and it's clear that he knows this moment will define not just this episode, but potentially his entire career. So there you have it, one of the most explosive interviews in recent television history, ending not with a polite goodbye, but with a statement about respect, boundaries, and the cost of entertainment. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we're always bringing you the most detailed analysis of the biggest moments in entertainment.